Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is John Whitcomb, and I'm a managing director in FTI Consulting's public affairs practice, and we're really excited to host today's discussion. Just a quick background for those of you who are unfamiliar with FTI Consulting, we're a global business consulting firm that advises telecom, equipment, and service providers across the entire business lifecycle. And this includes anything from due diligence in the context of M&A, strategy development and business improvement, and also strategic advisory support on major policy topics such as broadband funding and certainly BEAD that we're going to be discussing in more detail today. As we all know, the BEAD program provides a historic opportunity for individuals who do not yet have reliable and affordable internet access. And it also presents an opportunity for businesses and organizations across the country to come together around this common goal of connecting the unconnected. And FTI is very excited to be involved in this important effort, including through facilitating timely discussions, such as the one we'll have today on BEAD and digital opportunity, breaking down barriers to broadband adoption. Here with me to discuss this topic is Susan Walters, a regional director at NTIA's Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. And Susan has kindly agreed to offer formal remarks on why the E in BEAD is so important and what NTIA is currently doing to help states and industry build equity and adoption plans as part of the grant process. And following Susan's remarks and brief Q&A, my colleague Liz Rothenberger will moderate a panel discussion with industry leaders from service providers and equipment suppliers. But before I turn it over to Susan, I do want to review a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll be monitoring those submissions closely and we'll do our best to get through all of them. Also, please know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made public here in the coming days. We'll be sure to send an email with the link, so feel free to share it with colleagues who are unable to attend or watch it later as well. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Susan Walters. As I mentioned earlier, Susan serves as NTI's Regional Director for Western States. In this role, Susan oversees staff responsible for coordinating federal support of the state's broadband and digital equity work, including outreach and engagement to all stakeholders such as state and local governments, community groups, education and health care organizations, the covered populations named in NTI's grant programs, and other entities with vested interest in high-speed internet policy issues and grants. Prior to her role at NTIA, Susan previously served as the Senior Vice President of the California Emerging Technology Fund, where she managed $70 million in grant over the course of 15 years. Her leadership enabled more than 500,000 low-income households to subscribe to the internet and more than 1 million people to compete for digital skills training. In addition, she led the innovative Get Connected California program, promoting the Affordable Connectivity Program. Susan was instrumental in this effort, securing legislative support to add $330 million to increase broadband deployment and digital inclusion work, and the Internet for All Now Act of 2017. Susan holds a Master's of Public Policy Analysis from Claremont Graduate University, and also a Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration from the University of California at Berkeley. Susan, it's an absolute pleasure to have you today. Thank you for all of the great work that you've done in broadband in this industry and for so many people across the country. And with that, I'll turn it over to you for your remarks.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate being here and being able to share some thoughts about really BEAD and the digital equity programs. So let me get the right screen on and we'll begin. There we go. Okay. There we go. So we'll begin just by talking a little bit about just a level set. I'm sure many of you have heard the definition already for digital equity, but this is the definition for both digital equity and digital inclusion that appear in the Digital Equity Act and in the IJA legislation. So digital equity is the condition in which, right, individuals and communities have information technology capacity that's needed for full participation in society and the economy. And then digital inclusion really means the activities that are necessary to ensure that all individuals have access to, use of, and can afford information and communication technologies. And so we provide a couple examples here, but notably, it's whether it's apps or content online, of course, devices, skills, and one people may not think of as quickly would be, technical support. When you have a chance in your own communities, you may want to talk with people about what they think of as digital equities, just so you understand the context and that you're working in. We look at, if you will, this will be familiar to many of you, the pillars of digital equity, right? It's the essential pieces or foundation. You've probably heard of the three-legged stool. So we talk about access, skills, and devices. But when you look at the concept of digital equity with BEAD and with the DE programs, we have, as you can see, pulled out the analogy to a chair. You have your foundation, the skills, internet access, devices, and IT support, right, as the foundation. And that those coming together really equal the digital inclusion, and you have the ability really to sit on that foundation. And what supports you really as well are the 5 primary areas in BEAD that we have asked folks to pull in to their plans and to their initial proposals. These are the areas in states that really can support digital inclusion and support folks' path from the digital divide to digital inclusion and digital equity. A note of, in terms of just these essential skills, right? Keep in mind as you think about barriers, right? If somebody doesn't have access to a quality device and IT support, well, especially a device, they're not going to think about buying internet access, right? They may have some level of expectation of acquiring skills. They may have some basic skills, but unless there really is a good access to a device, and for the BEAD program, right, a device they would use at home, then there's not really much chance they're going to move into internet access and be able to, avail themselves of the other benefits. And that is one of the barriers that we see right now that is addressed less than some of the others. So if somebody begins their path, right, from the digital divide to digital equity, and I say someone, really it can be an individual or the state in the case of our programs. We're looking at this, both ways. This is a good characterization of that journey, right? And when we look at digital equity, or our destination, as digital equity, we are looking at those 5 areas I mentioned, right, to assist people getting to that destination, because these are areas that the covered populations, the underrepresented communities interact with, quite a bit. And when you begin to think about, what are the barriers to these, different stops along the journey, this is a place to ask, where are there obstacles to this type of, information? Are the skills training classes For instance, are they covering anything related to privacy, how to be safe online, what to look out for, right? If I'm going to, whether it's in school or whether it's at a healthcare application, is there anything that helps me understand those concerns in the context of what I might be doing as it relates to any of these goals? All right. So obviously for this audience, the benefits of high-speed internet are, well known, but let's think of them in terms of really the institutions within a state that you need to have participating. The work here is done best if there's collaboration. It's not always possible, and not always possible with every agency that may own all of these. We like to encourage those involved with BEAD and digital equity to look at the task as, how is the state doing, not how is your office doing. The office is really the enabler, and the coordinator, but it's really for the state, right? And all the folks, who reside in your state. And so thinking about how each of these different sectors really, why high-speed internet matters to them and being fluid with that is really helpful as you try and engage these other agencies that may not feel that this is really within their responsibility or their purview. But when we're asking folks to think about, when we're asking, state agencies, local government agencies, other institutions, when they're looking at how do they operate more efficiently, how do they operate more cost effectively, how do they reach more people, the answer often is, right, online through one technology or one type of tool or the other. So with that comes responsibility of how to provide, access to all the residents in the state, especially the covered populations and underrepresented communities. So when we look at, right, when we think about digital equity, as well as digital inclusion, that's really what's necessary for folks to continue or to have the opportunity to participate in society fully. And there are some, examples here. There may be a couple notes to the side that you may be less, familiar with, but these are ways to help different agencies, different organizations, different community anchor institutions, if they are not clear about why they should engage in the BEAD planning process or the digital inclusion process in your state, some ways that may help them, may compel them to feel like this is more important to their mission as well. A quick example, that I would like to say I'm sure wouldn't happen today, but chances are it could somewhere. There's a state that went to allowing folks to apply for unemployment benefits online, and with all great intention in terms of making it easier, cutting out the wait, trying to make it available 24 hours a day. In that process, they closed their brick and mortar offices. So these are decisions that really raise the questions around digital equity and barriers around digital equity and digital inclusion, because not everybody has it. And so as agencies, community anchor institutions think about their service delivery, it's another reason why you want to think about digital equity or digital opportunity, as some like to say as well. As you're moving more and more to online, how do you help people make sure that they are thinking about access for everyone who's going to need that service?
Hey, Susan, I
Yes.
apologize in interrupting, but I don't know that the slides are advancing on the screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we only
well,
see, I think, slide 5 right now, the pillars of digital
oh my
equity.
goodness. Well, thank you for interrupting. Okay. Okay. So do you see it moving now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. All right. Well, I won't go back and repeat everything. You will have a copy of the slides. So you will see them. This is where I was talking about why high-speed internet matters, and having, being really fluid and comfortable by thinking about what are compelling reasons. Here are some examples, a few statistics, why different sectors, need to think about how access is provided and their role in helping others get access. I was just moving to this slide in terms of the social determinants of health. This may be familiar to some of you. It's a framework that comes out of the, health sector, but it's been broadened in many ways. You can see that it doesn't only include direct healthcare. We put internet at the center of it because internet, right, goes through so many parts of society today. And when you look at the social determinants of health, which there's been a lot of work done to show how all of these impact health, if the access to a lot of these determinants really is moving online, then it's important for all of these sectors to think about how we provide quality access, right? How we provide a continuum of digital inclusion that really enables both the state and individuals to reach, the destination of digital equity. So these are the populations that both BEAD and DE, right, have called out in terms of what we refer to as covered populations, underrepresented communities. They are slightly different, but there is a large overlap among the groups. I don't think any of these will be surprising. If they are, we'll have time for Q&A, so you can certainly mention it. But these are the populations and the institutions that serve them that are the focus of both DE and the BEAD program. This next section I want to cover just really quickly. When we talk about really moving through the digital divide to digital inclusion and digital equity, it's like, who do we need to talk to? And so it's worth thinking about, the populations and who represents them, right? And the agencies that I was, mentioning earlier that cover those 5 primary areas. But also to ask the question of, who's missing in your conversation, who's around the table, who's not around the table. How do you invite others around the table? It is important in these discussions with stakeholders really to have an avenue where you're hearing directly from the populations. We talk about it as lived experience. That may be a term that's familiar to some and not others, but it's really about, have you heard directly from the population you're trying to serve? And some of your partners and stakeholder groups can help provide access to that. If you don't, to people, if you don't have it directly, you really want to be able to ground the work that you're looking to do in understanding that how it benefits the people you want to serve and how they perceive that. How you think about communicating may not be how they think about communicating. So it's an important step to touch along your path. You don't want, you don't want to spend time designing programs and then find out it doesn't meet needs or people don't quite understand, what you're looking at as familiar as you think, internet access may be to everyone. The language around it is not familiar. right? Access to it is difficult in many places, the process. Those are all different kinds of barriers. When we look at the slide that's up here now, it's specifically focused around adoption. That can give you some ideas about where some of the inequities are and where there may be questions to look at and things to really ask in your communities and with those who you're thinking about serving. So many people, right, of course, familiar with device access, it tends to be one of the most challenging ones. For those of you who are smaller providers or working with smaller providers, just hats off, because it's the smaller providers that are using the ACP benefit more than the larger providers. But obviously we need devices to get to everybody. And so to the extent that you're working with a state that's doing a BEAD or DE plan, any help or partnership you can offer them in terms of device access would be tremendous. Affordability obviously is a concern, you know, especially at the low cost. And I know there are lots of concerns about ACP. I think there'll be a lot of discussion about that later. For some populations, you know, as we talk to them, there is a question of perceived value. Seniors is one that pops to the top, but it's true for lots of populations. One of the areas to understand in your particular community is how people perceive the value of a cell phone and how they perceive the value, you know, of a device you would use at home, you know, a laptop or something. It's not uncommon that folks think of their cell phone as all they need. And for some people that may be true, but we know that when you have access at home, you have more service for the value of your dollar. If all you have is a cell phone, when you leave the house, right, the internet goes with you. Those who remain at home or who may come home after school then don't have access to do homework or work from home, right? May not have, you know, if all you have is, you know, one or two cell phones for a household, it can inhibit your ability to really have access to participate fully in society for everybody in the household. We know for folks in talking with teachers a lot, we know that kids that have a cell phone only in their home, right, they're not able to do homework after a certain point in the month because they run out of minutes, as an example. Whether you're an adult or a young person learning, there are lots of examples we've seen where people are trying to do papers on cell phone. That is not equity. And so that's why it's important to talk to folks about the value. You know, how do they perceive value? What do you see as important? And that's for the institutions as well as those we're trying to serve. Okay, let's go on. These are some of the, you know, key stakeholders. We are obviously encouraging people to engage. And, you know, I think many of them will look fairly familiar to you. And there's, you know, a big range, of course, under community anchor institutions, right? Local libraries tend to be local government or county government, but we also look at them as community anchor institutions. They can be in their own jurisdiction. We want to make sure folks are, as I said earlier, talking to organizations that include covered populations. All right. And just a couple concluding points here. It's really helpful when you can collaborate. It's a broadband office. Some try and do it with just a few folks, right? To the extent that you can help them engage and reach out, that's tremendous. This is a job that will continue, or a work that will continue for a while. We're beginning it now. And so better understanding the individuals in the covered population, people who've been historically disconnected, understanding what data is available, what's not available, what data is important to think about having on an ongoing basis so that you can really measure how well you're doing. There's nothing worse than going out with a strategy, doing it for 18 months or 2 years and finding out you didn't have an impact. How do you have metrics and data that let you know that you're having an impact, soon into the process? And then, of course, having some sort of inventory to understand what kind of programs are out there now, right? And what do you need? And how do you help the institutions in your community understand what's out there? So if I am, a healthcare institution, I'm not going to do everything, right? How do I help folks who come to me who may not have an email, who may be anywhere on that roadmap, right, to digital equity? How do I help them know where to go, right? Every institution does not have to do everything, hence collaboration. All right, and then close out with just a slide. As you do the work, think about, right, really what your terms mean, and get very comfortable with them. If you're not comfortable with them, if you're working with an institution that's not comfortable with them, help them get, comfortable. People use digital opportunity instead of digital equity. That's fine. The work is what's important, and the outcomes in terms of getting people connected and getting them online and understanding how to use the tools through all these sectors to improve their lives is the point, right? We want to move from a digital divide to digital inclusion and digital equity, right? Through empowering the individuals in the institution. So I'm going to close there. The presentation will have some additional slides that give you questions to ask as you work through these different topics and are identifying barriers, trying to think about solutions. There'll also be some suggestions for tools that you'll be very familiar with, like SWOTs, where to use them, how to use them. Thank you.
Well, Susan, thank you. Great presentation, great comments, a lot of very helpful insight that was shared. And again, thank you to you and the NTIA for all the leadership and work you're doing on digital equity and inclusion. We have time for about 3 questions before we move over to the panel discussion. So I will, and by the way, thank you for those of you that have submitted questions through the chat function. Again, we will try to get through as many, at least a few of these questions, and certainly try to follow up with any additional questions as well. But first question has to do with affordability. Right now, ACP is key for affordability, and there does not seem to be a clear plan for ACP. What is your perspective on what needs to be done for ACP on the advocacy front? And by ACP, obviously the Affordable Connectivity Program. So maybe Susan, any thoughts, questions on that program?
Sure. I think you're going to talk about that on the next panel, and I'm going to really leave it to them to go into detail. As a federal employee at NTIA, I can't really speak about other agencies' programs in terms of advocacy. I have heard folks at the FCC talk about the importance of reaching out, to senators, but I'm sure there are lots of folks who will have good suggestions on that.
Got it. Understood. Also a question with respect to online safety. You talked about online safety. Are there states or any of the states including online safety as part of their digital equity plans that you're seeing or hearing about?
Yes, many of them
Yep.
are focusing on safety online, and there are various ways to do that. Part of it is in workforce training, part of it is in just basic digital skills training. But I think everybody has a heightened sense of the importance of that and updating that. There is a fair amount of it that occurs through digital citizenship and education institutions. They are very mindful, as you know, parents are very concerned about, kids
Yeah,
being online. So it's in lots of different places.
great. One additional question here. Will states be able to allocate funds for device access plans? Do you know any clarity in terms of how funding can be used for device access plans?
States can, for the BEAD program, if you are using money for what we call non-deployment activities, that needs to be specified in the initial proposal that those are being submitted now. They're due the 27th of December. And many states are saying, well, all our money really has to go to infrastructure, and we understand that. But there will be states that have some money left for non-deployment activities, and they need to specify what their priorities are, what they're interested. I would encourage any state, though, even if you think all your money is going to be used for deployment, to put something in for non-deployment. Because think about it, if you're in year 3 or year 4 of this activity and somebody, for whatever reason can't complete their program and you're getting down to your deadlines, you need to be able to spend the money. I mean, obviously we'll take it back, but we would rather you spend it and, toward this effort. You want to have something under the non-deployment activity just as a backup. Because it's there doesn't mean you have to spend it. You can say if there is money available, but don't leave it blank.
Yep. I'm actually going to ask one more question before the next panel. This is really helpful. Is there a particular state, as you look at all of the activity that's happening across the country, is there a particular state or maybe states plural that are doing a really great job, or just any examples that industry should be looking at in terms of what really good looks like, or examples of leadership in this space?
There are lots of plans that are posted for public comment. Very few of them have we approved yet. I think there are some states, let's come back to you. There are definitely some states that are doing, a great job, both on BEAD and DE, and really have some strong examples. But let me come back to you after they've been approved, just so we're clear in that regard. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Susan, thank you again for your time. We really appreciate the remarks. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Liz Rothenberger. She's going to introduce the next panel and moderate discussion. Liz, over to you.
Thanks, John. And thank you, Susan, again for joining us and offering your insights and remarks. It was very helpful. I am going to introduce the panel now. We'll start with Todd Way. Todd is the manager and CEO of Douglas Fastnet, which serves Douglas County, Oregon. And he has a vast knowledge of the telecommunications industry. He's been in his role as manager and CEO for over 15 years and has been vital part of the company's development and success. When he was hired in his role in 2007, it was a company of 3, and now, over 20 years later, has grown to almost 80 employees. Prior to his time at DFN, Todd started working for US West Communications as a network technician while attending Oregon State University. And after graduating with his MBA and BS in construction engineering management, Todd became the local area manager of outside plant operations for Quest Communications. From there, he moved into the role of vice president of operations for Rio Communications, where he spent 3 years before joining Douglas Fastnet. In addition to his role there, Todd is also actively involved in several boards and committees, both in the national telecommunications industry and in Douglas County, Oregon's local community. Next up is Shannan Williams-Mitchem. Shannan is currently the Vice President of Public-Private Partnerships at Ready.net, supporting their work with state broadband offices and local governments, and leading partnerships with institutions interested in using Ready's data platform. Prior to her role at Ready.net, Ms. Williams-Mitchem was appointed as Deputy Director of the Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives in the NTIA Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth, where she helped lead the management of the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program, a $265 million investment in expanding broadband access to minority serving institutions and their anchor communities. In her leadership role at NTIA, Ms. Williams-Mitchem was a firm advocate for greater engagement within unserved and underserved communities of color in meeting NTIA's goals for digital equity through engagement with trusted partners, local service providers, and community anchor institutions. Prior to her time at NTIA, Ms. Williams-Mitchem worked for nearly 10 years at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly known as NIST, where she led high-profile research and standards reform initiatives in the Special Programs Office, and has held positions as associate at Booz Allen Hamilton and mayoral fellow for the city of Chicago. And last but not least, we have Ash Brown. Ash serves as the Senior Director for Field Marketing at Adtran. Ash began her career at a family employee-owned telecom company and moved then to consulting on marketing and customer experience. And immediately prior to joining Adtran, she provided NISC's BSS, OSS software and marketing solutions. She is passionate about understanding the broadband market space, funding, digital inclusion, technologies, opportunities, challenges, and helping broadband service providers succeed with deployment and growth. She believes in creating a stellar customer experience through understanding of the community, business, residents, and of course, the data. Thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate you taking the time. I'm gonna first start with a question to Shannan, and it touches on the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is what we kind of ended with Susan. When most people think about broadband barriers to broadband adoption, they first think about affordability. And right now, the Affordable Connectivity Program is the leading program that helps provide subsidies for low-income individuals. Can you talk about why ACP is so important and why it helps drive forward adoption?
Absolutely, Liz, and thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of our company, Ready.net, and be a part of this esteemed panel, so thank you. The Affordable Connectivity Program, yes, is absolutely an important program in addressing one of the key barriers to internet adoption, which is affordability. I think through the years, if you're part of the broadband industry, you've seen these studies that analyze the causes and barriers for connecting and adopting internet access, and affordability typically is one of those that are one of the major factors, the leading factors that lead to that. And so the ACP, in providing monthly subsidies to people who want to access internet for $30 to $75 a month, really does reduce that cost barrier to obtaining internet access. And while we know that there have been some challenges with enrolling in ACP, it has been an effective program. About half of all eligible households for ACP have enrolled in it. And that equates to about 19% of all broadband subscriptions in the US. So people have become heavily reliant on ACP, and it has been effective, particularly in cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and Baltimore, areas where there's high unemployment and poverty. And these are precisely the areas that need the most access to internet connectivity to enable digital opportunity. And so I know that lots of advocates are working tirelessly to ensure that ACP continues to exist and get more money. And fully in support of that because of its importance and effectiveness in bringing internet access to people of low income.
And on that point about the program continuing and making sure that it sticks around, Todd, as an internet service provider, obviously you want customers and potential customers to be able to afford the service, particularly for the BEAD program, which requires some sort of low cost offering. Can you talk about how the ACP helps kind of check that box and what the impact would be if that ACP funding does run out, what other options there might be, and how that would impact smaller providers like yours?
Sure. So when you look at what BEAD's going to accomplish, it's going to build out networks where the industry has not been able to economically deploy fiber or other assets in the past. So as we're building this out, adoption is going to be critical for the continued operation of the networks. So getting every customer online, every potential customer online is critical, and that's where ACP will play an important role. If a customer can't afford to purchase the service, then they just won't. They'll stick with a cell phone or other technologies. And when you look at BEAD is a CapEx program. There's no continuing OpEx for maintaining the network. So every dollar is critical. And we have real costs running this network. You'll pay pole contacts, you've got property taxes, you've got to maintain the network following windstorms, snowstorms, etc. Without ACP and the base to support that network, you're going to see networks that were funded by BEAD or other programs that won't be able to be maintained in a few years. And so that's my worry should ACP run out.
Great, thank you. And Shannan, back to you. So affordability is just one part of digital equity planning. Can you talk about some of the other factors that exist that might prevent someone from signing up for broadband despite actually having a connection to their home? I know Susan touched on it a bit, but can you kind of expand on what those other things might be?
Right. Yes. Susan made some excellent points about the different pillars to achieving digital equity and that undergird digital inclusion efforts. But one thing I think is really important to consider is what it means to, quote unquote, have service, right? That varies differently, vastly from resident to resident. I think in a lot of these conversations, we talk about digital literacy and skills changing, training, better education. And that is very important in overcoming the obstacle of, encouraging internet adoption, but reliability and making sure that lower income residents have a reliable connection that performs at high enough speeds that enables them to participate in a meaningful way, in addition to having the devices that connect to those services is really important because, a resident it's a zero-sum game, right? You come, you have a certain amount of income. You have to make a choice as to whether you want to pay for a smartphone and get access that way or have in-home internet connection. And if we don't address some of these reliability issues, and that's where BEAD comes in, you have a even more uphill effort in encouraging adoption. So, reliability is one, privacy and security. It was great that Susan mentioned the types of services that providers offer. Like I have a colleague, Onisha Freeman, shout out to her, Director of Digital Equity in Georgia, talks a lot about how important customer service is, and that in digital equity planning, you should consider making sure that there's improvements in providers' service to customers in order to also facilitate and aid adoption. So there are a myriad of reasons, but challenge folks to think more about making sure there's equity in the service that is provided to encourage adoption as well.
It's really interesting. It's a very multifaceted problem with a lot of different solutions. Ash, let's turn to you. You've been working in the digital equity space for quite a while now. Adtran doesn't provide service directly to a customer's home, but you are a very important part of the broadband ecosystem as a whole. So can you talk about why digital equity and opportunity has been such a focus of yours as of late?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Yeah, I really believe that for us to succeed, we need to be educated and invested. As Susan mentioned toward the closing of hers, to collaborate and engage. And that's not just the state broadband offices, that's not just NTIA or the service providers, it's the entire ecosystem. So if we expect change, we as the industry need to understand the opportunity and the challenges, really especially from the broadband service provider standpoint. So Adtran has dedicated time and resources to the digital equity topic so that we can assist service providers by understanding what they're going through and delivering value adds to them to help them on this topic of digital equity, digital inclusion opportunity. Some of the things that we have done have been community engagement case studies. One, for example, with Douglas Fastnet, also providing ACP marketing campaign material to help service providers actually talk about the program, and also really building connections to the federal program officers and state broadband offices. So at the end of the day, it's important to understand, collaborate, and engage if we want to see change.
That's great. And I know Susan couldn't quite answer the question just because of the position she's in, but have you come across any states that are doing it really well, or any good examples of companies who have some interesting case studies that you can share with us?
Yeah, well, I think from the company standpoint, there are so many service providers focusing on this, and we as an industry, I don't think are doing a good enough job telling those stories. But Douglas Fastnet, like I'd mentioned, they did a really great community impact study, and that allowed them to engage at a higher level with their community anchor institutions. And from that study, they also were able to use that to help develop and attract workforce, which is an incredible benefit to that. There's a lot of companies focusing on ACP promotions within their schools. So those students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, they are automatically qualified for ACP. So the schools and making sure you're working with the schools is a great place to start when it comes to ACP. Also, I think that another great company that's doing good work is Joe Carroll Energy in Illinois, Sand Prairie Internet. They have done a lot of community engagement. And if you go out to, if you're familiar with livability, and you go and look at their studies on connected communities, that's another great example.
Great, thank you. And we got a shout out for Hawaii in the chat. So one vote for Hawaii as a state to look at. Thank you for that. Todd, since your company got a shout out and a mention, do you want to talk about what Douglas Fastnet has done to expand adoption in the community and support the community, really? And as part of that, can you also talk about community anchor institutions and how they play a role in what you do?
Absolutely. So DFN is really built on the relationship between the company and the anchor institutions. We've got several studies of where we utilize USAC to deploy out to a distant city and serve homes along the way. Working with the local schools, we get the calls, this student needs help, they can't afford the drop to the home, and we'll work with them to fill those needs where we can. We, like Ashley mentioned, we did this community impact video with DXTEL, and it really, even for myself who gets so focused on deployment and trying to get that next mile of fiber placed, it's fun to turn around and look back to see what we've accomplished and how we've helped the community. Everything from during COVID, DFN Cares, where we gave free internet to students that couldn't afford it, to wildfire response, where we've deployed fiber to the fire camps to help with the fighting of the fires and keeping the firefighters connected at home, and for folks that lost their homes in some of these fires, setting up free Wi-Fi. All of those are just kind of part of the mission and what we have done to help further the benefit of the broadband.
Great. And just a reminder, I know we're getting to the end. If anybody has a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A function. And we can be sure to ask the panelists. This one is for anybody who wants to answer. Maybe we'll start with Ash and Todd, and then Shannan, you can also jump in. But state broadband offices are an important part of this, and there needs to be a lot of collaboration between companies and the states. What advice would you offer, or what would be most helpful in terms of interactions with state broadband offices and making sure that you're reaching everybody and that you're having the conversations that you need to be having with the right people? Ash, do you want to start?
Sure. I think it comes to the collaborate and engage. So if you've not engaged with your state broadband office, regardless of who you are in this industry, make those connections, learn from your state. For example, I live in Colorado and I have a vested interest on what is happening in Colorado. So me as a resident here, engaging with the state broadband office to understand what they're doing. But the entire industry, the vendors, the service providers, it's just making that connection, talking to them about what they're doing, what their challenges are, how we can support them. And what Shannan's company, Ready.net, if you don't have the time to do it, also talking with somebody like Ready.net who's doing a lot of that work. And if you're an Adtran customer, I'm working with a lot of the states, like rely on your ecosystem because it's going to take all of us to get this done.
Absolutely. And thanks for throwing that lob over to me with regard to Ready.net solutions and services to state broadband offices. We serve a growing number across the country, 12 and counting. And, if the advice that I would give in terms of how SBOs can play a role in collaborating and facilitating and interactions with ISPs to meet their digital equity goals, it would be, first act as a facilitator, right? So like be the place where you have comprehensive information about all the work that has been done by veterans of the broadband community that is evidence-based, that shows how to address issues of digital equity, to create mechanisms through automated services and technology solutions like Ready.net, where we offer a mapping platform that enables more objective and accurate assessment of broadband need, make those available to everyone, essentially, so that we can all hold each other accountable. And then finally, and that leads into the last suggestion, which would be to offer fair accountability to providers and other stakeholders to make sure that we're addressing some of these concerns that hinder adoption.
Great. Todd, any thoughts?
Well, I echo what both these folks said. From a provider point of view, I think just being involved and being present. These state broadband offices are getting inundated constantly, and you just need to be heard as well. That would be my advice.
Great. Well, with that, I know we're reaching the top of the hour. We are unfortunately out of time. Digital equity and opportunity is certainly a complex issue and a lot of different aspects that we could dive into even more and have a lot of long conversations about. But unfortunately, we only have an hour. So with that, I would like to thank Ash, Shannan, and Todd for joining us and sharing your thoughts. And again, thank you to Susan for joining us as well. We will send around this recording, and we'll also make sure to share Susan's presentation with you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, and we will also put you in touch with the panelists if you have questions for them. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.